Chairman Peterson, Vice Chair Thomas, Ranking Member Humphrey, and members of the committee. As I said, my name is Bill Scott. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and House District 38. I serve as the State Director for Convention of States here in Ohio. We're a nationwide organization, nonprofit with over 5 million supporters, and more than 2.5 million Americans have signed our petition for the Convention of States. Right here in Ohio, we have 113,000 of those who have signed the petition. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the purpose of the Article 5 Convention and why it's in the Constitution. The founders established 3 branches of the federal government with checks and balances to limit powers of each branch. They also check powers by wisely balancing it between federal and state governments. That balance of power is called federalism. And unfortunately, that balancing check is now nearly gone in our country. And why is that? Because for many decades, the states have failed to push back against the federal overreach by asserting their own constitutional powers over centralized federal power grabs. As the power in DC has grown, America's trust in federal government has declined. According to a 2022 research article by Pew, in the 1960s, more than 70% of Americans trusted their federal government to do the right thing just about always, maybe not always, but they trusted it most of the time. Today, that's only 20% of Americans think the federal government can be trusted. This finding holds for both Democrats, Republicans, as Americans have become more and more dissatisfied with an extremely bloated and overreaching federal government. As Dr. Ferris mentioned pretty well here, Article 5 of the Constitution was designed to ensure that that balance of power between federal and state governments remains in place. And with Article 5, the states can rebalance those powers using their ability to propose amendments. With the states proposing amendments to the Constitution, it's important to recognize the distinction between the Constitutional Convention of 1787 and what's being proposed here today in HJR 3, which is simply a meeting of countrywide state legislators to propose limited amendments. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was obviously not called under Article 5 of the Constitution because it didn't exist yet, it wasn't written. Opponents of convention states often try to confuse and scare people by conflating 2 different types of meetings. An amendment proposing conventions is not a constitutional convention, or a con-con, as many opponents call it, in a rather pejorative way, I might say. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was not called under the Articles because the Articles made no provision for any such convention. Instead, it was called under the reserved sovereign authority of the states. The states were completely sovereign at the time our Constitution was adopted, and the Articles of Confederation recognized that they had the power to write a new constitution. They had that power to draft a new system of government, and that's what they did in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. That's not what HJR 3 does. What this resolution does is use Article 5 of the Constitution to allow the states to exercise the same power that Congress has every day to propose amendments. No different. They can propose amendments any day of the week, and they do. In just 20 words, that's what Clause 2 is all about. It says, and I won't read it again because Representative Brown has already read it. So as of now, 19 states have passed virtually identical and operative language in Ohio in HJR 3. If it's passed, along with a companion resolution in the Senate, we could become the 20th, 21st, 22nd state. Our United States Constitution is the world's longest surviving written charter of government. The unrestrained growth of reckless spending by our federal government places our country in an extremely dangerous position. If we don't put a stop to the financial recklessness of DC, inescapable monetary forces will do it for us, throwing the economy and our way of life into chaos. The worldwide consequences would be, I dare say, devastating if America collapses due to its own self-inflicted wounds. As legislators in Ohio, you have the authority and the responsibility to check the federal government, and each of you took an oath of office to defend and support the Constitution. So your support today in HJR 3 can help fulfill that promise. Thanks for the opportunity to testify, and I do appreciate it.